Drugs. They ain't good. They'll do all sorts of things to you. And the US really doesn't like them. In fact, they fucking hate drugs. Of all kinds. They hate them so much the US has been waging a war on them for over 50 years, resulting in thousands of people being jailed, communities wrecked, and a total of $1 trillion just about wasted on a crusade that has gotten worse and worse over time. But how did we get here? And what are the socio-economic impacts of the war? And can I summarize it in 2 minutes? Let's see! The war on drugs began in the 1970s thanks to an order by then-President Richard Nixon to create a Drug Control Act to monitor the use and movement of drugs in the US. Now, the war on drugs didn't really have any headway in the 1970s thanks to the Watergate scandal, but in the 1980s, one man decided that America's drug problem was too great to ignore, and so the former star of the hit movie Bedtime for Bonzo, Ronald Reagan, pumped a shit ton of money into combating the most dangerous drugs at the time, such as crack, meth, and pot. Yeah, I'm not kidding. And from that, he started pumping millions of dollars into things such as the Drug Control Act of 1984, and made it mandatory for children's TV to show public service announcements during commercials that have become infamous.
And if you do drugs, you go to hell before you die.
And since the 1980s, more and more money has been pumped into anti-drug law and enforcement, peaking recently in 2022 with $41 billion being spent on it. And the results of the war have been, to be blunt, horrible. When looking at it through an economic lens, it is remarkable how botched this whole thing has been. For one, most of the money has gone to mass enforcement of anti-drug laws and the arrest of people who have either been suspected or convicted of actually selling or buying drugs, with many extrajudicial killings happening because of these cases. The enforcement of drug prohibition has also led to many cartels growing over time, as the market for illicit drugs have increased, because when people don't have access to something they're addicted to, they'll go anywhere for it. And those who have the drugs have all the power to sell them for monstrous prices because they can't get them anywhere else. It simply redirected the supply and demand of drugs from one point to another, which provide the chance for criminal organizations to grow because of the profitable trade. In some cases, even the police have been involved in the trade of drugs, either collaborating with cartels or just outright doing it themselves. My favorite example being a recent one where a cop was arrested after he was found smuggling cocaine in a Bible. It is straight out of a cartoon, and it's honestly kind of hilarious. However, it must be stressed that this war has mainly focused on communities of color, mainly black inner cities, or as some award-winning PBS News reporters call it, the Black Ghetto, and the impact of the war has been positively negative. Enforcement of these prohibition laws resulting in the mass incarceration of black people who, when released, can't get jobs because it's been on their permanent record. And according to a report by the World Health Organization, or WHO, lowering the productivity of the workplace and the home of some of the most affected areas, hell, the war on drugs has gotten so bad that some people have even called it the new Jim Crow. Not really an award-winning title, isn't it? And despite all of this, despite all the money being pumped into trying to stop the trade of drugs, many drug-related facilities have been criminally underfunded in the past 30 years because of their association with drugs, such as opioid substitution therapy clinics, which have also handled people who are suffering from HIV and have been proven to help. And because basic social services that treat drugs have been underfunded, there has been a massive increase in people who have been using drugs, with a 2019 report showing that the usage of illicit drugs had grown 13% in that year alone, growing to the highs of when the drug war began in the 1970s. Clearly something ain't working, eh? Even the creation of anti-drug marketing yielded no great results, with the infamous Just Say No and DARE programs being shown to have no impact on teenagers' decisions to not use drugs, and in some cases even led to teens actually using drugs. And even then, the PSAs they would use were often misleading, extremist, or just plain fucking confusing.
This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
My guy, that's an egg. So to be blunt, the war on drugs has been a complete economic disaster that was never going to work in the first place, and people have known this for a long-ass time. In a paper written in 1999, 23 friggin' years ago, it states that, quote, enforcement remains the dominant drug policy in the United States, despite evidence that it is overused. And all of this isn't even going into the fact that other countries have been impacted by the war as well, such as Afghanistan and Colombia, which have been, to be blunt, infamous cases of the war on drugs going wrong. And while people such as Nikiti Tifa have made headways in trying to stop the war, every year more and more money continues to be thrown into this just to be wasted. So while it might change soon, it's probably not going to change for a long time. So remember, kids, don't do drugs, or you'll turn into a giant skeleton.